Good afternoon. So I'm Jacob Kim, and I'm the webmaster at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And I primarily work with web and digital projects that interface with on the public engagement side of things. Dan Michaelson is our, introduce yourself?
I'm an adjunct faculty in the graphic design department at the School of Art. I teach a couple of the interaction design classes to the grad students there, but I also run a digital studio in New York City. Is my full-time job, and that's how I got connected with the Hirshhorn.
Right, and Dan was our creative lead and development lead on the Hirshhorn Eye project. And I'll talk a little bit about the steps that we took up to developing this digital engagement product, and then Dan can go into a little bit more detail. So the Hirshhorn Museum is Smithsonian's National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. And our use case for machine vision was to create a digital engagement product to be used in our galleries. One of the benefits of being a contemporary art museum is that we have access to living artists. A lot of the artworks that we exhibit in our galleries, the artists are still around today. So we wanted to take this advantage and leverage it in a way where we can share their stories and create more context for the artworks that are being exhibited at the Hirshhorn. When we started exploring different engagement products out there already in existence and technologies, we were looking for something that could help kind of deliver that point of view from the living artist. And we started looking at a wide variety of different technologies and products out in existence to help facilitate this vision. We looked at technologies such as VR, AR products, in-gallery interactives, native apps, and such. All of these tech products had very strong merits of their own, but they weren't exactly what we were looking for. A lot of them were cumbersome. They took a little bit of foot space inside the museum galleries, and we wanted something that would be a little bit more invisible. So with our market research, we finally arrived on a vision for a product that we wanted to develop on our own. And to help, part of the vision for that product that we wanted to develop was to create a connection between the visitor, the living artist, and the artworks that are presented in our galleries and tell their stories. We started with an old model of the traditional audio guides that are available, and we wanted to use emerging technologies to create kind of the next generation of audio guide and museum guide for our space. And when we started that process, we started looking at technologies such as QR codes, location-based technologies, beacons, but all of that felt very cumbersome and not very user-friendly for our visiting public. Ultimately, we settled on leveraging image recognition technology to create a product where a user could go to a website, point their phone at artworks, and listen directly from the artist talking about their practice. So in partnership with Link by Air and Antenna International, we developed this product called the Hirshhorn Eye. The Hirshhorn Eye is a web-based museum guide. It uses computer vision to recognize the artworks in our galleries and deliver content. And I'd like to show you a little video about how it works. Oops.
It just takes a minute to start moving this.
There we go.
Welcome to my artwork in the lobby of the Hirshhorn.
So I thought I'd talk a little bit about sort of the process that let this project come together, and maybe it's nice to kind of end or conclude this amazing set of talks with sort of some snapshots in a way of a team trying to apply the kind of research that you guys are doing and that everyone here is doing in different ways. One thing that we sort of realized early on is that thinking cross-functionally and in an interdisciplinary way is really essential. And so I'll sort of start with the thank yous rather than end with them. The project was a collaboration between actually a pretty wide group of stakeholders within the Hirshhorn Museum, from the director to curators to exhibition designers, and Jacob and visitor experience people, as well as a CIO on like technical infrastructure issues that arose, Antenna International, which helped with production, a really great team of filmmakers in New York called Captain and the Fox, a user testing specialist, a marketer. The image recognition itself is like the easy part in this project. It's an API service from a company based in Barcelona. And sort of to Catherine's point, at this point, the actual image recognition, at least in a project like this, is a commodity. Basically, we're a small business, and the technical challenges per se were not large. For us, we didn't need to be an Amazon. And similarly, my students in the art school are doing lots of stuff around computer vision and image recognition now. So this kind of work is definitely percolating into sort of the creative atmosphere for sure. And I think that that's really leading to lots of really interesting opportunities. Our role was the user experience of the product and really thinking that through holistically. The interface design, what does it look like, and how does it actually work on the screen, and the engineering other than the actual image recognition neural network itself. Also really involved were the artists who you saw Olaf Eliasson starting to tell a story about his work, but the key to this was it's not interesting to tell the user what is the title of the work. The purpose of this is to connect the user to an artist talking about the work, and so what stories they're telling is like 90% of the product. And also, as I'll talk about, we learned a lot from what we would typically call users, but a museum would tend to call visitors, the people who are actually using this product in this space. So today, Rebecca really, at the very beginning of this morning, talked about, or sort of evoked like a large team and kind of big science working together. And, in a humanities project like this one, an interdisciplinary team is also really important, especially for a project that takes images in the physical environment as its input. And basically, it's images in, images out. You get other moving images as the output. You're transforming pixels into pixels. So thinking synthetically about user experience, technology, visitors, artists, curation, what are the sequence of works that are being brought together, content production, staff maintainers, how are people at the Hirshhorn authoring these stories and continuing to expand and change them as new exhibitions are mounted. And also how are visitor experience staff on the floor helping visitors use this, and also the physical environment, which I'll talk a lot about, or talk more about in a minute. Thinking synthetically and holistically about all of that, even when those are the domains of multiple different vendors, multiple different departments, multiple kinds of thinking, is really important for success. Here's an early snapshot of a team of Hirshhorn's and Smithsonian staff, and also I think that's Alice from Antenna, brainstorming and testing, and lots of this project was scanning simulations of images in small offices and figuring what that would be like. I think this was sort of one of the first web based applications of its kind in this space. And this is possible because, or that is the case because as of 2017, when it was only with iOS 11 was it possible to scan an image in real time in a web browser. So iOS 11 came out in like the fall of 2017, right around the time that this product was meant to launch. So we were sort of developing towards a thing that didn't yet exist. And there was we really didn't want to launch this as a native app because we know from research that the take-up of native apps in a museum like this is really low. People don't want to install an app on their device that they're only going to use once or not often. So that involved a sort of embrace of risk a little bit on everybody's part to think about, developing for something that hopefully was going to work 6 months down the road. And we managed that by having sort of fallbacks. We had a sort of native app fallback that we could use if necessary. Peter talked about or mentioned how to work with rather than against human curation and expert description. And I think that was really sort of key to our thinking that, it's not the technology that's the end, but the technology is just an instrument for storytelling and for connecting users to living artists telling their stories. User testing was a huge part of our project, and we did that with Hirshhorn staff. We did it with Smithsonian staff. At one point, like hundreds of Smithsonian staff. We did it occasionally with random visitors on the floor, and very importantly, we did it by recruiting testers on Facebook and places like that in order to ensure that. We had diverse demographics among our testers. A big goal of the project was to show diverse artists, actually, from of all genders, nationalities, ethnicities, and similarly, a goal was to make contemporary art, which can be alienating and intimidating, feel accessible to lots of different kinds of visitors, meaning like tourists off the mall who were not art experts, and also people of all ages and cultural backgrounds. So testing with lots of different kinds of visitors was essential, and we learned so much from doing that, and I'll talk about I'll give a couple examples of what we learned. Testing at the Hirshhorn goes outside as well. It is also a sculpture garden. Here are non-staff testers. And even seeing how people sort of physically, bodily use these products, use this product, or how do they stand, how much are they looking at artwork, how much are they looking at their phone, is really helpful, both sort of quantitatively, like sometimes it's something we needed to address or remediate, like when people were sort of not using the thing in a way that is going to work or would interfere with their enjoyment, but also qualitatively, just understanding that different people are going to use this interface in different ways. One thing we learned pretty quickly, not so much from user testing, but from looking at sort of other similar applications, is that lots of people will be confused and think that you can use this website when you're not at the Hirshhorn Museum. And so we thought, should we use location permission? But that can be kind of intrusive. And I think the team finally kind of collaboratively came up with this really basic, this is the dumbest thing you've seen all day. We'll just ask people, and that's actually been, I think, a really effective solution, and something that's really, we design lots of websites for museums, and this simple way of thinking has actually really kind of been influencing how I think about other museum websites as well. Early designs, when you could sort of keep scanning, so you could almost like collect artworks, and because the scanner is so sensitive in a way, and artworks can be hung close together. The idea was that we wouldn't want to sort of, you could be confused actually by accidentally having the wrong thing triggered. You're trying to scan one thing, but there's another thing right next to it. And so we thought even while you're sort of watching one artist talk to you, it might keep scanning, and then it would sort of collect up in this tray at the top. And that's the prototype that we tested with users, and we quickly found that was confusing, and we needed to take this already simple interface and simplify it even further and remove that feature. A sort of physical surprise that we saw was that visitors really want to scan the label. They're so trained to be scanning like a QR code and also to be searching for a label that they would walk up to the label and get really close to it and scan it and then step back and look at the artwork. And our goal was that you wouldn't need to be so kind of didactic in your use of it, but that it could be a kind of freer experience of walking around and just kind of breezing your phone around, and things would pop up. And we knew from testing with our visitors that no one will read the instruction. That's not a judgment. That's for sure. I wouldn't either. And you're trying to get to it, get to the experience. And so we tried this illustration that could sort of model the behavior that we were hoping for visitors to take. Even so, it was so fascinating walking around with visitors and talking to them about their experience using this. And a lot of them talked to us about their sort of consciousness of wanting to look up at the work and not get too absorbed in their phone. Some visitors just hate it, and they absolutely don't want to use an electronic device when they're in a museum. Some kinds of young people, they walk through, they scan absolutely everything. They watch the first 3 seconds of every video, and other people really had a transformative experience actually with it, and talked about seeing artists who looked like them, understanding for the first time that a contemporary art that might be ugly to them, understanding the motivations of an artist and where it comes from, really, really deep in their connection to it in a way that sometimes they hadn't had before with this whole genre of art. This product is used in real life, and I would argue that that's true of kind of everything, on some level of everything that was talked about today, that there's a physical context in which people are, reading books or doing data entry or learning about art or engaging with art. And that sort of physical disposition was a big influence on the design of the interface, as well as on solving some of the kinds of problems that I've just alluded to. So, early on when we were doing testing, it was important to also sort of include the labels and, think about the context that this is happening in. This is not a sort of disembodied codex of JPEGs. For the sort of fallback, so that a user the image recognition does not work very well on label text. It's not distinct enough. And but it was really important that there be a fallback for someone who would scan the label. We learned that from watching visitors, and also because some of these works, which I'll talk about in a minute, are very hard to recognize. And so in those cases, well, in every case, basically, there's an image, a frame of the video that you get, for example, which is reliably recognizable, and which also cues the visitor that this work is in the system. And one of the nice things about having such a low barrier to entry that is not a native application is that there is this short URL that you can just enter into your web browser at any time, so you can start sort of anywhere in the system and follow any pathway. But basically every work in the museum is in the system with a few exceptions at this point. And finally, letting visitors know that this is here and that there is this additional available layer to the experience is actually sort of one of the biggest challenges. And it's even more heightened actually at the Smithsonian museums on the Mall, where there's no pay gate, there's no ticketing, so you really just walk right into the museum. So there's no point at which there's no inherent point at which visitor services staff can say, here is this thing that you can do. So on the one hand, there's this low barrier to entry. On the other hand, we really need people to know that they can take that step. The exhibition that we launched with, ironically, was called What Absence is Made Of. And an image recognition app is about the pixels. It's a kind of a ghost in the shell. It is about dematerialized objects. So What Absence is Made Of was a very poetic exhibition to start with. It featured not exclusively minimalist and conceptual art, but a lot of minimalist and conceptual art. Just reading from the description of the exhibition, a curator described it as the spaces left behind when something disappears, and as work on a massive scale, yet with the barest materials. And so this is Didier Vermeuren's sculpture, and it's kind of meant in part to look like the pedestal for other artwork. That's Fred Sandbeck. It's string. That's Rainer Novo's black squares, and these are Joseph Beuys's black squares. And it turns out that once you seed even one black square into your image recognition database, every dark corner of the museum pops up Joseph Beuys. And Peter kind of talked about unexpected. I really like seeing that Fred Wilson image, and talking about unexpected juxtapositions, and we really created a situation in which the work was sort of work that was meant to be curated together and tell a really amazing story, in fact, matched up with each other through this kind of technological prism in a way that was a challenge as well as an opportunity. That's Giovanni Anselmo. This hand is not part of the artwork. The artwork is just a single slide and a slide projector with the word visible projecting into empty space. And so you can only see it when you interrupt the projection. And it's also a single slide, so it just slowly burns actually in the light as it changes. It gets more and more brown every day. So this is an artwork that is meant to defy machine vision. We can work around those problems often by seeding the scene, and by, as a couple of people have talked about, by making sure that we're including humans in this process of thinking about sort of where the artwork is located, literally in this case, and taking a couple steps back or moving around the sculpture to seed images that are going to be effective. And that means, again, watching visitors and doing lots of testing. And I think that's a kind of like Stephen was talking about, a kind of human knowledge that is always going to be an essential part of these projects, especially, and will be most effective when you work in an interdisciplinary way. So the last image I wanted to show is sort of the solution to the Anselmo problem, and critics kind of talk about in a work like that. Is the artwork the projection? Is it the situation? Is it the slide projector? In our case, it's the slide projector that scans actually really effectively. And so here's that work kind of shining back out, and this is a team of testers from the Hirshhorn and the broader Smithsonian, kind of trying to figure this stuff out. So I'll stop there. Thanks a lot.
And I just wanted to add that, kind of going into the next section of the talk, is that While the Hirshhorn Eye was driven with a very specific content strategy at the Hirshhorn, we believe that what we created is applicable widely across different subject matter. So what we've done at the Smithsonian is that we've started taking the Hirshhorn Eye and adapting it for use across our different museums. And we're also working with third-party external organizations and trying to adapt the Hirshhorn Eye for their use as well. Eventually, what we hope to do is to create an open source version of the Hirshhorn Eye and to make it readily available for smaller museums and organizations to pick it up and deploy at their space as well. Thank you.